Great moments are born from great opportunity.
Football is about controlling that anger, harnessing that aggression into a team effort to achieve perfection.
It's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. The hard is what makes it great.
All right, Bubs, we're back in person. Good to be back here at the Play Ball Academy. It's good to have Joe back here making us look good.
Joe, the mastermind. I like it, Joe.
Hey, if there's any way you can cut a couple lbs off of the chin or hook it up that way, dude. Yeah, we're trying to get some good posture and
shoulders look good.
Help us out with that, all right? No, I appreciate you being here, Joe, and helping us out with this. Episode 4, Bubs, we're talking maybe when it comes to team development, the most important thing when building your team, and that's core covenants or values. The reality is, if you don't have these going into your program, going into your season, when you're starting, if you don't have some values that you can live by, you're probably going to fail because your strategy is not going to uphold.
Totally agree with you. I think sometimes we talk about values and it's easy to toss 5-6 words out. But I think, like you mentioned, it's standing by that structure and also being very depictive on what the program means to you. And as a head coach, how you reflect that. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
We get a lot of youth coaches that'll say, this is what we're about, this is what we do, and then their actions don't reflect what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think it's extremely important in building. I'll jump into it, Jeff.
Yeah, let's go.
I know a big wording, like, your covenant, it's kind of a fancy word. To me, it extremely was. To me, a covenant had two parts of meaning. It was a physical, just being visible with everything that we wanted to do during practice games, how we were in the hallways, just what we emulated as a program in the community. And to me, it was also a binding agreement. Value is kind of like a promise, right? Like, Coach, our values are good. I promise to go by this. A binding agreement, when you use the word covenant for our program, meant you displayed it at all times.
It's a stronger word, right? Like covenant is just stronger. It makes you feel like more secure.
It does. I think it was good. Like we almost like was a covenant to a brotherhood for us on the baseball side. But just some basic things. Like, a lot of people were like, "Hey man, how did you develop or build your covenant?" Well, from a coaching standpoint, I'd always have a meeting with my assistants, right? And we said, what does our program want to be? Like, what are we going to explain? What are we? In order for the athletes to buy in. So a big 3 things that we came with for basketball, baseball, soccer, whatever we came up was integrity, accountability, and communication. Those were 3 things that we had to have every athlete buy into. And then we got in detail with each specific team on some covenants that the athletes wanted to go by. And I think you'll get a little more in detail with that with some of the teams you coached. Some of the things that, I asked myself prior to meeting with my coaches was, hey, what do I want my team to stand for? Like, what was a reflection of our community, my name, the school's name, like what was that? And then what was a great standpoint for our coaching staff, right? Because like we talk about, Jess, like, we can have all the ideas in the world, but if we don't got a great support staff to execute that plan, then it's just an idea.
Yep.
So you got to make sure they're on board with that. You want to make sure you got input from them. And what I stood for was that going to reflect from our staff, right? Because the kids see right through that. Very smart kids. What does it mean to be an athlete in our program? I think that was one of the questions we always wanted with our core covenants. I sat down with individual meetings before each season, and I just said, hey, what did it mean for you to be a Chatfield baseball player? Mm-hmm. Like, what? And I wanted just to hear that, like, reply from them. And I really knew where my covenants were guided and engaged towards. If it was about wins and losses, if it was about wearing a jersey on game day to school, I wanted it to be deeper than that. I wanted it to be community based. How clear my vision was as a leader. Like, how did I represent that? How did I have a lingo explaining that to parents, to administrators, to athletes, to making sure the staff knew what was going on? You had to have all flavors of lingo with that and be transparent. I wanted no gray area in my program with covenants, Jess. I wanted to make sure everyone understood. And then how clear my vision was that towards the team. We talk about evolving. how I explained my covenants to athletes 10 years ago was a completely different version. Not necessarily my covenants changing, but my version or lingo to the athletes that I talked to 3 years ago was completely different, right?
Yeah, yep.
Like we talk about just having that lingo and having to adjust with how times have changed with our athletes. So I hope that some guidelines on building covenants, some ideas that coaches can kind of go with, but it's a deep thought. I don't think it's something that you develop overnight, and it may be something that alters, not necessarily like your values or your core, but individually and team-wise, you can kind of adjust with that, right, Jess?
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple things. I think a lot of teams, especially in high schools, you think that they throw a poster on the board that has these really fancy words, and it could be what you just said, right? Accountability, commitment, communication, and they throw these posters up on the walls, and they say this is who we are.
Yeah.
But then they never teach it, then they never revisit it,
Sure.
and they're never holding people accountable to it. So it's one thing to have these core covenants. It's one thing to believe that this is who we are, what we do, how we do it, so to speak. But it's another thing to teach it to your coaches,
Right.
have your coaches be able to teach it to your players, and then really live that culture.
And I think that's the biggest thing is living that culture, right? Because we always talk about like, let's say my most talented athlete didn't live that culture. I think you have to execute that core covenant with everybody involved,
Yeah.
right? And you're hoping that you're like our goal as a coach is to have your best athlete, your hardest worker, someone that's bought in. Today's day and age, and I use that term loosely because maybe 10 years ago I still use that term, today's day and age. That's not always the case, but you have to make sure you're executing and you stand by those covenants with every athlete, with every family, with everybody in the program. Because the minute that link kind of tightens or winds or loops, the whole structure can collapse.
Yeah.
You know, and then that's key.
Yeah. So when we really got good and when we really turned a corner at Lincoln is when we got more focused with our values, our covenants. What we called it was a culture blueprint, and we took that from Urban Meyer. And there's a great book out there if you guys ever have a chance to grab it. It's called Above the Line, and in that he talks about his core values and he calls it a culture blueprint. So in there you talk about your beliefs, and our beliefs were commitment, tough, and together. Those were the three things that we were going to stand by. Our culture, what we called our culture, was uncommon, and we got to that point to call it uncommon because we're trying to look at our kids and what really is going to stick with them, what's really going to stand out with them, and we wanted our football players to be better in the classroom. We wanted them to not be the standard what was going on traditionally
Sure.
by the everyday person in the hallways. So when we would talk to our players, we would talk to them, we are uncommon. Well, what does uncommon mean? Uncommon means that we are committed, we are tough, and we are together. And the commitment part was all about something that I said on an earlier podcast was the best sons are the best sons and the best students are the best football players. That's what commitment was. So if I ever told a player, hey, commitment, what does that mean? That player would be able to regurgitate that to me and understand the outcome that we're trying to achieve. If we told them that the outcome that we're trying to achieve with being committed is that we're being able to be relied on by our families, by our
Sure.
teammates, by our teachers. So it was a whole process, right? I am committed. I am the best son, the best student, which means I'm a good football player, and the outcome I achieve through that is I'm able to be relied upon.
Yeah, I love it. No, I like it because we just talked about a good amount of things that meant a lot to our program, and it had nothing to do with X's and O's.
Yeah.
And the minute they bought into that, like coaching and them learning was second nature, man. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't built overnight. You agree?
Yeah, 100% agree. The way we got there, the way I got there personally, and kind of tie this into a old Lincoln story. I was the biggest Lincoln hater in Southwest Denver.
Sure.
I was a Kennedy kid, and so I was the biggest Lincoln hater in Southwest Denver. 2007, 2008, Lincoln's going to state championships in basketball, and I remember you guys were going down to CU to go watch a game.
Yeah, Benson.
And I said, no, I'm not going, because that's how big of a hater I was. Fast forward a few years later, 5 years later, I'm teaching and I'm coaching at Lincoln High School.
Yeah.
And I walked through the gym, and it was a basketball practice. Vince Valdez was running the basketball practice. And when I walked through that gym, Bubs, I knew something was different. And people, you know, we say Vince Valdez in the basketball community, and people go to recruiting and all this, and I will stand by this, and I will stand by him, and he's one of the best coaches that I've ever been around.
Sure.
And I walked through that gym that first day, and I saw what was happening in there, and I stopped, and I sat down, and I watched. And it kind of all came full circle when I was on his staff a few years later as a C-team coach, and his core basketball values were transition, spacing, and ball pressure. Hope I'm not giving away any secrets there.
Yeah. No, it's probably been that way since day one.
And you know, but the key to that was everything that we did. He was teaching me that, and I was coaching C-team kids who really had no business, but we were playing some top-end programs, and we were beating top-end programs because our focus on what we were doing every day in practice was all that.
Yep.
And that's where the success came from. And just a story to wrap it up, we were in the playoffs that year. We were going down to play Mountain Vista, who was a tremendous transition team.
Very fast. Yep.
Very fast. And they were getting up and down the court. And I remember we had this conversation before we got on the bus. The coaches were meeting, and we're kind of just going through everything. And this is kind of my basketball claim to fame. They were talking about, the rest of the coaches were talking about us slowing down and not being who we were.
Sure.
And I spoke up and I said, listen, we've been the best transition team every game that we've played. Let's have them adjust to us. Let's go do what we do and see if they can adjust to us. And Bubs, I mean, we had this team on the ropes.
I was there.
Yeah.
I was there.
And we took them into deep waters. They threw this crazy half-court trap on us early in the second half. And you know, honestly, we didn't have an answer for it. I remember Vince looking over at me, at the whole staff, like what should we do? And I was like, tackle them.
Yeah, no, I remember.
My football coach came out at me, but you know, we missed some free throws, but we stuck to who we are and what we're doing. And I learned that season. That was my only season coaching basketball at the high school level, and I learned that season how important values and covenants are to the success of your team. And then to top it off, that same winter, I went to CU for a coaches clinic. And I'm sitting there with one of my assistant coaches, and head coach at the time at CU was Coach Mike McIntyre.
Yeah.
And he came and he's doing his rounds and he's talking to all the coaches, but he came in and he grabbed his lunch and he sat down right next to us. And in my mind, I'm like, I gotta ask him something. Like, I'm not just gonna sit here and like it's like kind of like a first date with a hot girl, you know? Like, I'm not just gonna just
quiet.
Yeah, just like hey. So we introduced ourselves, and then I asked him. I said, what do you think is the most important thing in success to a team? And his words were vertical alignment. So you take your core covenants, and then everybody within the program has to believe the same thing.
I totally agree. And your story was 100% on point, because think about it. Vince was a head coach. You were assistant coach at the time.
Yeah.
But you were 2 feet in on everything he did. And you had to reassure them and remind them when they wanted to maybe divert from the course that got you there, and it was going to be through and through. You almost put the kids in a different realm or a different comfort level if you try to divert from that plan.
Yeah, for sure.
And you were talking about playoff time, so they had got there all season with that transition style basketball.
Yeah.
But it's just great to hear that you were an assistant during it and we're 100% bought into that.
And again, to his credit, right, to listen to a football coach that spoke up during that time when he could have said, I've been here, I got 2 state championships, I've been here before, I don't have to listen to you. So as head coaches, to be humble, to listen to your assistants, and to have assistants that are willing to help and to speak up.
You were 100% right with staying the course.
Yeah.
You have to stay the course. And I know you didn't get to win at the time, but it was probably, I was at that game, and I have no problem saying it. I think, like I told you probably a couple times, I felt the second half of that game you guys played not to lose rather than playing to win.
Yeah.
And in high school athletics and all athletics, there's a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I think you kind of, in those big moments, and we could talk big moments all the time, and maybe we will when we get to that question, but you really got to be quick with your responses and your change, especially in basketball, right? Like things change so rapidly in basketball.
Sure.
if you're not ready with the counter to the counter to the counter,
right.
you start to fall behind.
And that's what makes the good teams different from the great teams.
Yeah.
And then, big school basketball, it's that way. In baseball, it's that way. I'm sure in football, it's that way, right? Schemes and plans, you have half times, quarters, and everyone makes adjustments. And that's why the detailed parts of the game during practices and stuff are very key.
Yeah. And with football specifically, going back to my forte, right? You have to have a team philosophy, team core covenants, but then you got to break it down, and you've got to have an offensive core covenants. Right. You've got to have a defensive core covenants, because for us on offense, we wanted to make sure the defense defended the entire field, and we wanted to stay balanced, and we wanted to be simple. So every play that we had, every run play that we had a counter plus a play action coming off of it. So that was part of us being balanced.
Sure.
So it's not just you take your core covenants of who you want to be as a program, and then you break it down to that strategy and build that into the core covenants, not the other way around. I think so many coaches want to start with the X's and O's, the strategy, right, and then kind of shove in the core covenants.
You're absolutely right, and that's where the infrastructure collapses, right? That's where you have issues with teams and you're rebuilding, or you're having issues midway through the year, and it's never about the X's and O's because you're putting out the fires from not having the core covenants for the program.
Yep.
And we were the same way with baseball. We'd have just miscellaneous stuff like, our goal is to be fast. Like, we wanted to be fast on the bases. We had to lead the league in steals for us to compete at a high level. We wanted to, and we were always like, I was never, hey, we're not going to lead in home runs. I don't really care about, we wanted to be OBP. I cared about on-base percentage. And I let the kids develop that.
Yeah.
So we'd bring in the older kids and we said, hey, man, for us to be very successful, be league champs, compete at the state level, give me some things that you think we need to do.
Yeah.
And we'd build from there. We'd really take 5 topics, and that would be the team for 2018. And then maybe the 2019 team was built a little different, right? So we'd have those covenants for the 19 team and then the 20 team. But I was really put it in the hands of the athletes, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones playing the game. They're the ones between the lines. So it's good to delegate that.
Yeah.
I think as a head coach, I don't want it to I'm sure you weren't like, we're going to pound the football and we're going to do this, and they're like, coach, that's not how we're built.
Yeah.
Yep. Being able to evolve and allow the kids to delegate a little.
Knowing your kids.
That's it.
Knowing who you are.
Evolve,
and your core covenants don't change, right? You're always going to be about that. But how you do that, your strategy, it allows your strategy to change with your athletes. Right. Because if I want to be balanced, sometimes I'm going to be balanced by spreading you out first and hitting you with quick passes and then coming to the run. Other times, depending on my kids, I'm going to run the ball first and then open it up, right? Sure. But you have to have those kids on your team and know who your kids are, and not trying to fit them the square peg into the round hole. Right. You're fitting a system into your core covenant, so that way you can have a strong foundation to stand on.
You're right, Jesse. It's being able to evolve on the fly.
Yeah.
And I think the good coaches become great when they're able to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like we talk about, what's a good coach? A good coach to me is someone that can delegate time, speaks well, is able to get the best out of student athletes.
Yeah.
The great coaches can adjust on the fly when their starting quarterback goes down and their running back is out for a couple weeks,
yeah.
Being able to adjust.
Yeah, quickly adjust to anything.
Right.
I used to give my coaches, when they'd come in, I'd give them a daily breakdown of all the crap that happened throughout the school day. Like, hey, Johnny is gonna be a little rough today because he broke up with his girlfriend. Yeah. Mitch got in trouble in math class, so we got to make sure that we're following up with him. So it's not just coaching, but you're doing all that so that way your coaches have all the information they need to reach those kids. But there's the adjustment, right? Like, hey, Henry's missing practice today.
Sure.
Right. Next man up. Well, next man up coach is the 5'2"
sophomore, freshman.
Yeah.
Yeah, this freshman has to get some touches today.
Well, guess what? We're building depth today.
So true. And it is being positive mindset.
Yeah. And we're not stopping. We're not going to stop coaches. I don't care if there was 10 kids that showed up to practice. Those 10 kids are going to get coached really, really well.
You're 100% right. And I like that, Jess. I think putting the coaches on the fly, I think something I did traditionally, which wasn't a fan favorite my first couple years, was I'd build a 15-minute segment and I'd lie on the practice plan. I'd lie. I'd literally say we're going to do base running during this segment. I'd get all my coaches together and I'd say, all right, Joey, Jimmy, Johnny, whoever it was on the staff, you got 15-minute segment to knock this out. And they look at me like, oh my gosh. And you have all the high school athletes with eyes and attention. But I felt being able to put them in an uncomfortable position, have them coach their way out in practice, made them better coaches during game time.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's always situations in that. So So I kind of tried to build that through the practice plan, just getting them better.
Yeah, and you hit on something it's related, right? You also have to have a coaching philosophy and covenants with your coaches.
Yeah.
And one thing that I eventually got really good at was making sure our coaches coached all the time. Sure. There's always something to be coached, and being on the football field, and this happens so often in football practice, is it becomes social hour. Right. And the football coaches, because we're running plays, want to sit around and want to talk. Like, no, if you're a defensive coach and we're having an offensive practice, the kids that are running scout team on defense need to be coached.
Yes.
Well, it's not our scheme. Doesn't matter if it's not our scheme. Coach their fundamentals.
Yeah, that's so true.
And when you do that, and also, like I used to always tell our coaches, like, practice is not sermon time. Our kids aren't out here to get a sermon and hear a lecture. Right. They heard lectures all day in school, and now you want to get them on the football field and lecture them for 5 minutes about what they have to do. Yeah. Get them moving. Get them doing reps.
It's like an energy killer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're talking more, I think our thing was I tried to have a 4-minute conversation about. It was more of a demonstration. Mm-hmm. 4-minute demonstration. Everything was active after that. You didn't want those energy killer moments, and there was times to talk. You always had to get your points across, but I never wanted to do that in a team setting when there was just dead bodies sitting there.
I would challenge any coach to take a step back of your team huddle at the end of practice and just watch the kids. Yeah. You've got them for about 2 minutes. Yep. You got to get your point across in about 2 minutes, because after 2 minutes, the eyes start rolling, they start wandering, the birds are chirping, the squirrels are over here. Like, you've got them for about 2 minutes to hit on whatever points you want. Yep. And you've got to be direct, you've got to be intentional about what you're delivering after practice. Yeah,
I totally agree with you, and I think that's something that should be attempted or demonstrated, even at the youth level, man. I mean, it's not hard. Hey, and I came to the point where at the end of our games, we wouldn't even really break down much. Every coach had to say one thing positive. We'd get our hands in a circle. Whether we lost 10-0 or won 10-0, it was give everybody something positive, just one sentence, get our hands in, and we'll work on it tomorrow. Yep. I think, they were already mentally exhausted from playing a 7-inning game, and I just wanted to always end on a good note. Yeah. And I think it challenged my coaches to not be coach obvious. Yeah. Like, hey, we didn't do this. No shit. They just went through that. We just want to say something positive, get them on the bus. So.
And it doesn't. To me, it doesn't even have to be positive. It has to be productive. It has to be a productive. It could be a critique. Sure. That's fine, but it's got to be quick. Got to be to the point. They got to know what you're talking about. You can't. I see this with youth football a lot. Is the coach at the end of the game starts talking a language that he's never taught to the kids. Right. We didn't. I don't know. I'm just going to use. We didn't get to the line of scrimmage. Did you ever teach them what a line of scrimmage is? Because in your core covenants, there's also a language that has to be taught, and especially at the young youth level. One of the first things that I do with my teams is I teach them a line of scrimmage, positions, because it eliminates so many headaches going forward. Sure. If you watched my youth team play, I'd ask them, what does pursuit mean? And every single one of them will scream, get to the ball as fast as you can. That's what pursuit means. So I don't have to spend time during the games like, we're not getting to the ball. Right. I just say pursuit, 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 and they know what that means.
Yeah, they know the lingo that you're saying, and I think it's very important that each coach tries to develop their own. Yes. Right? Like just some key words, something basic, something key, and that's good. Another coaching tip is just something that popped up to me. Common things kids do not want to hear on the field. Mm-hmm. I used to put up a thing in the dugout, and I'd say, hey, guys, during this week, I just want you to jot phrases, lines, something that you don't want to hear. You just don't want to hear. Yeah. And Jess, I was guilty, man. A lot of the shit on the board was probably coming majority out of my mouth. Yeah. So I was able to evolve and adjust, and it made the kids a little more comfortable. And my lingo that I thought might have been A+ was maybe a C, and I had to adjust and evolve with that also. Yeah. But it got the kids a little more comfortable.
We keep hitting on this point since day one of we started doing this podcast, but the humility you have to have, right? The confidence, number one, to be a head coach, but the humility to go along with that confidence. Yeah. I always say a strong ego versus a big ego. Yeah. A strong ego knows when to be humbled, right? You could have said, no, I'm right. We're going to do this. Yeah. But you seeing that is a testament to you being humble and a great coach and willing to adjust.
Yeah.
Because if you're not willing to adjust, you're just not going to get things done.
Right. That's a good to great type adjustment, right? Like anyone can say, I'm good, we have this wins and losses, but how do you become great? I wanted to make sure the kids were comfortable as can be, and I had enough pride in myself to say, hey, let me know what's making you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure my staff adjusts to that, and, you know, we're all wearing the same colors, man. Let's get it done together.
Absolutely.
So very, very key. Just some small adjustments, but no one really thought of that. Some of the stuff on the board, Jess, was like, throw strikes. And they're like, don't say throw strikes. We know we're not throwing strikes. Like,
Coach Obvious.
Yeah, don't be Coach Obvious. And it was just a simple verbal cue we never said again, and it made the kid comfortable, and he probably threw some more strikes.
Yeah.
You know? So just stuff like that.
There's always something, like if he's not throwing strikes, was his release point off? Did he overstride? Did he not get enough power out of his back? And I'm just speaking off of my head. I don't know if those are anything that
just
for
some
pitching.
Different verbal cues that had the athlete a little more comfortable, and his performance was affected by it.
Yeah.
You know, so
Absolutely.
good tidbit there.
Nice. But yeah, core covenants, make sure you've got them and develop them. Know how to deliver it, know how to teach it. It'll go a long way.
And stay the course with them.
Oh, there you go.
Stay the course with them, you know, through thick and thin, stay the course.
Yep. All right, so halftime adjustment. We're going to do something different for our halftime adjustments from here on out, because what we really want to do is make this valuable to anybody out there who's listening. And if you want a coaching tip or anything that you can tangible that you could take with you after listening to this, we want to provide that to you. So Bubba and I are going to give, for our halftime adjustments from here on out, we're going to give simple coaching tips that can help you and your kid in the backyard or you and your team to take with you.
Yeah, so something that I thought about that can be something visualized. So every home plate on a baseball field has a point or a tip, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that tip's always pointed towards the catcher at all times. A simple adjustment with all the instruction that I do here is if you're a right-handed batter, your right big toe should be somewhat angled or tilted towards the plate. And I think that's a simple adjustment. 10 out of 10. Oh, so let's say I have a 10-year-old walk in here and he's never had personal instruction before. 8 out of 10 people that come in through that door are either parallel or their back foot is running negative, meaning their big toe is running away from that tip. And I think just a simple adjustment for structure, alignment, just path to the baseball is just having your back foot angled towards the plate. It's going to allow your hip, which is your power, to get to an easier contact point. It's going to help you adjust with velocity. It's just something that I find myself saying every day of the week here at the facility. So if you're listening, if you have those little guys or even those older people, if you're having older kids having trouble getting to velocity, I guarantee that simple adjustment with that back leg, obviously if you're left-handed, that'd be your left toe, but that simple adjustment's going to go far.
Nice. With the simple adjustment, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit quarterback right here with the young guys. And one really big misconception with throwing a football is that it is like throwing a baseball. Mm-hmm. It's not like throwing a baseball. What it's like is hitting a baseball. Sure. And you're talking about your power point from the hitting standpoint. When we talk about throwing a football, the action or the commonality between baseball and football is hitting and throwing a football. Yeah. So we're talking about load phase. I don't know what you call it when you're talking about hit, but you're talking about your load phase. Yeah. And then you're talking about that stride, keeping the shoulder closed. Yeah. All of that stuff is football, throwing a football. So when you work with little kids and you want your little kid to be a quarterback, focus on 3 things, right? Make sure you have a grip. And with your grip, make sure that grip is thumb and middle finger strong. So you should be able to hold your football with your thumb and your middle finger. That's most important. The next most important is to have space between the football. Sure. So when you first start to put a football in your young one's hand, make sure the grip is right, because that's always going to come back as they get older. The next thing is focus on power, not accuracy when they're young. Because if when you throw as hard as you can, the natural motion is going to come into play.
Sure.
And so when you're working with little kids and you're saying, hey, throw that to me. Oh, do you think you could throw that farther? Do you think you can make it even farther than that? I bet you can't throw it this far. It becomes fun for the kid and they start using the motion and they're like, hey, when you threw that ball, here's your cue. Make sure your elbow goes above your shoulder. And then they start throwing it as hard as they can and their elbow's getting above their shoulder. And now they're starting to develop great habits.
Sure, yeah, habits are key, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And always with the demonstration. Coaches, you have to demonstrate the skill that you want your kids to learn or have somebody demonstrate it for them.
Right. And I think that's key, that it's a fast demonstration, ton of movement for the athlete while they're trying the demonstration, if that makes sense. I just think sometimes, I even have instructors here, we'll have big group settings, and I'm like, guys, we got to keep it under 5-minute talk. Yeah. You can give a quick demonstration, and then talk to them while they're attempting the drill.
Yes.
Make your adjustments while they're attempting it, not necessarily while they're sitting there watching you or looking at an angle. Have them throw it 10 times.
Yeah. When I'm coaching quarterbacks, I use one-word cues, right? And we throw maybe about 80 footballs in one session, and every time I'm like, elbow, load, stride, and those words, because I've taught the language,
sure,
whoever I'm working with knows what I'm talking about when I'm using those cues.
No, I like it. Very minimal.
It's using cues rather than sentences.
Yeah. Or sometimes paragraphs. Like half the lessons, I'll go to facilities and I'm like you talked for 20 minutes and he hit like 20 balls.
Yeah.
Like that's not beneficial for a 10-year-old.
No.
Like I think he needs to be putting in as much work as he can, and you make your adjustments as you go.
Yeah. And you gave me a great adjustment with my kids. We talked about it before too. And they're in, and I wasn't coaching the team, but they're in the batting cages and they're hitting and they're hitting and they're hitting. Yeah. And all I kept telling them was, what was the cue? It was down the runway, takeoff.
Yeah.
Down the runway, takeoff. And I would tell them like, hey, you didn't take off on that one.
Yeah.
Hey, your runway was bad.
Crashed,
your runway was bad. And every single time, because I love the coaching part of it, but every single time, hey, take off.
On the barrel. Sure. Yeah. Just those small cues. Mm-hmm. I think that's very good.
Yeah. So we got a question, Bubs, and we're going to close out the show. We got a question from Claude Vigil, and Claude's been coaching for a really long time down here in the southwest area, Bear Creek, and we got a difficult one, and I like it because it kind of challenged us to think a little bit, because it's a hard question. The question is, what is your greatest moment as a coach, and what is your worst moment as a coach?
Greatest and worst, yeah. It took a minute for me to really sum it up. I can probably go a million different ways with that. That could be a whole topic. Yeah. It's greatest and worst. My greatest memory as a coach was the 2009 Jefferson Saints baseball team. The reason why is we had qualified for postseason, right? So I know everyone's going to be like, oh, it's kind of cliche. It's a win-loss type thing. It really wasn't. The 2008 team was the best team I've ever coached in team sports. Best team, and they didn't qualify for postseason. But that 2009 team was a part of just a culture in Edgewater that was beyond, I don't even know how to put it into words, Jess.
Yeah.
Like, it just really developed a lot.
Transcended.
It for sure did. I think I told a story from 5, supporters in the stands to us having 100 in the 2009 clinching game for us to make postseason. I still have the article at home where they're dumping water on my father, and just to see the expressions of these kids jumping up and down, kids that, we had for 4 years that probably didn't own a glove 4 years prior, Jess.
Yeah.
Kids that were showing up to tryouts in jeans and a collared shirt, so just seeing those emotions and the final verdict of saying, hey, we have done something not only for baseball but for our community and for our school, was something that brings chills to me just to even talk about.
Yeah,
so
that's
really
awesome.
Cool. One of my best moments was that. One of my worst moments, there's a couple to go by, but just trying to establish something at my alma mater, being at Lincoln, and like in our first episode, just talking about how we were let go due to some new administration, some people that weren't really part of Southwest Denver or had no idea of how important that community and culture was to me and my family. So being let go from Lincoln High School early on, my journey has definitely transcended and been a lot of different ways. Probably because of that, I may not have said I've coached at the collegiate level if that didn't happen. But I always wanted to stay true to the community I was a part of, and that derailed it early, and that was probably one of the worst moments for me.
It's kind of it's fun and scary to speculate on what would have happened had that never happened to you, right? Like, would you still be at Lincoln? Would you have grown as much as you did as a coach? Would you have never evolved because you were like, I'm good enough, I don't need to evolve, right? And at such a young age, as a coach, if you're learning that I'm good enough, man, you really get stuck. So, blessings in disguise, or losses turn to lessons, right?
Yeah, 100%. It put a chip on my shoulder early, but I made it positive, man. I was able to help develop so many other programs and communities, and it really challenged me early, man. It was kind of like sink or swim. But you always think about the what ifs, like you talked about. Bottom line is, like, I grew up in that community, man. So.
And we always want to give back, and you do, right? You're still serving that purpose.
100%. And at a different level now, but I'm absolutely on board with serving that corridor of where I grew up.
Absolutely. So it's hard. It's hard to think about. I've had a lot of bad moments as a coach, and not necessarily with wins and losses. There's been a couple rough ones in there. The close ones are always harder than the blowouts. Right? Like you're here and you could have won it if one thing close. Changed. Did I do enough? Those types of things.
We take it personal. We do. We take it personal.
And I'm a very personal person. Like I really get deep into my relationships with my players. And I remember this one time, and this is just part of it, but I had a quarterback. And I was just the quarterback coach at the time, and we're going through a drill, and we're looking at a cover 2, and he kept missing the hole in the cover 2, and he kept going to his flat read, which a cover 2, you shouldn't go to your flat read, and I just lay into him, I was like, I lost that. I threw the hat, like just go, and I went at him. I said, just go home and start watching football, kid. Like, just get home, watch football. All I want you to do this weekend is turn on the TV and watch football, and more colorful language than that. And I just went off on him for like a 2-minute rant about watching football, like on the TV watching football. Stop playing Madden, watch football. And he looked at me as I just completely ripped him, and he's like, Coach, I don't have a TV.
Wow.
And you talk about, and we're from humble beginnings, and for me to just go off on that, and for him to come back and say that, I just, it was really.
You had to take it all in.
I had to take it all in. I was rough. I apologized to him. I wasn't afraid to apologize, tell him I was wrong, and we have a great relationship to this day. But that was one of my moments. But I'm gonna tie this answer to kind of a larger picture. I think whenever you work in the inner city, unfortunately, you are likely going to experience tragedy. And my best and worst moments are kind of tied into the same thing. I back in 2017, it was my last year coaching. Going into the last game of the season versus Kennedy, I get the worst phone call that a coach gets. 5 a.m. call, hey, so-and-so was shot, and it's not looking too good, And so we're going in to play Kennedy that following week. I'm out my defensive coordinator because I had a thing with my coaching staff. Like, he was having a baby. He just had a baby. And I not that if I told him that he had to be at practice that he would have. He's a great man, so he probably would have been with his baby anyway and told me to take a hike. But he was with his family. So during that week, going into that for a couple weeks, I was the defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, quarterback coach, linebacker coach, and head coach, right? So all these things, and it was a culmination of everything that I had learned through football going into that week. Get this tragic phone call, and the sad part is this kid was still close to a lot of players on the team, and it never gets old. Like, and you never get used to it. You're always dealing with it. And me, I try to take care of others first and try and put myself behind. Deliver the message to the kids. We tried to use it as motivation as much as we could. But those moments are the worst, right? When you're out of control. You don't have control of what's going on. And so many times in our neighborhoods, Bubs, like, kids drink everywhere. Kids go out and smoke all across the world in every single demographic. But the problem is in the inner cities is when you combine alcohol with the insecurities that come from being poor, with everything that we go through, and then you throw a gun into the mix. Bad things happen.
It turns tragic.
It turns tragic because I'm not making decisions for myself, and now I'm drunk, and my ego is coming out, and everything's coming out. And now you looked at my girl, and and these bad things just happen, and it happens too often in our neighborhoods. So going into that game, so kind of getting into the good part. We had put this fake punt in, and our long snapper was a 5'3", one of the smartest football players I ever had.
Really?
Yeah. Like, he's just an incredible football player, but he's just 5'3".
Yeah, just a little guy.
Yeah, he could do everything on the football field, and he would play everything. He was playing long snapper for me. So the game starts. One of my best players down there receiving the kick. He fumbles the opening kickoff.
Oh.
Kennedy picks it up, scores right away.
Oh.
Very next kickoff, he returns it. He comes off the field. Back up a little bit. He comes off the field. I'm like, it's all right. We got it.
It's early,
but
good.
You could just see the devastation in his face, and I'm like, I'm picking him up, just picking him up. Next kickoff, he gets it, takes it to the house.
Nice.
Tie ball game. Next kickoff, we kick off. They take it back to the house.
Oh, wow.
so we're in this back and forth. But after that next kickoff, things kind of settled down. And our game plan, we were able to establish our game plan. I really felt during that game that we can dominate them up front. We had a kid on the line that's a senior now at Shattering, and we really just ran the ball at him, and it was part of it. But my favorite part about that game was I always wanted to game plan against Kennedy as a defensive coordinator, but I let my coaches do it, and it was my opportunity. And we put some side adjustments in on that game where I knew what they were doing formationally, and teaching it to our kids in that environment under that situation that week was difficult because it was hard to keep them focused. But they would come out in formation. My middle linebacker would make the side adjustment, and we just had them and executed it. Like, and then the other inspirational part about it, we had a running back who was really close with the kid who had got shot and would not go down on first contact.
Ran with the vengeance.
He ran with the vengeance the entire time. So we go through this game and get to we're up by a touchdown. It's 4th and 2. We're on our own 40, somewhere midfield, and I call a timeout. And I'm talking to one of my assistant coaches on the headsets. I'm like, do you think we should go for the fake punt here? He's like, nah, I don't think we should. Like, let's punt it. Let's let our defense. But they had kind of made their adjustments, and they were kind of moving the ball on us now.
Momentum they had, yeah.
And so I'm on the headset with him. I get into the huddle, and that little long snapper, he goes, let's fake it, coach.
He already knew.
And I didn't say anything. He looked at me and said, let's go for the fake. And I looked at him, and I smiled, and I got on the headset. I said, hey, we're going for it. So we run the fake punt. We pick up the first down, and the rest is history. But I got off that field, and I remember with the emotion of that week, I remember hugging my wife and like just tears, Bubs, because everything just kind of came together. It was a culmination of everything, and that was my greatest moment as a coach, combined with the worst moment as a coach.
Yeah, that's tough, man. But it's far too often we hear those stories in the inner city.
Yeah. And if we had an answer to it, like, we would give it. And the answer to me is family and home, and the guns aren't going anywhere, unfortunately. Yeah. But my message from that event, turning it into a positive, right? I have this message to our kids is nothing good happens after midnight. Right. And just go home. Yeah. When after midnight is when everybody starts to get drunk, those egos start to come out, and that's when the bad things happen. So
You're right.
and it continues to happen all the way up until today.
You're right,
There's some happened today that kind of got me sideways. So for our hope for what we want to do through sports, right? Because sports gives kids hope, and when they run out of that hope, then despair comes.
You're right.
And the kids with despair are the ones that are making the decision. They lost all hope. They have nothing to look forward to.
You're right.
Sports gives kids hope. And
agree.
we need great coaches to give kids hope.
They do. The platform we have is coaches, man, at all levels, whether you're coaching 9U or collegiately, man, that platform should be taken seriously.
Coach them up.
No doubt, coach. Coach them up.
Hell yeah. Cool.